Within 48 hours, a story began to move through Hollywood with a force that felt both sudden and unsettling. A home in Brentwood, once associated with laughter, long conversations, and the quiet work of a lifetime, became a place spoken about in hushed tones. For those closest to Rob Reiner, the shift was difficult to comprehend. Familiar memories of Rob and Michelle now stood alongside a loss that had arrived without warning, leaving behind questions no one was ready to answer. When Billy Crystal, Rob's friend of decades, appeared in a memorial video, the response was immediate. It was not only the emotion that held people's attention, but the restraint beneath it, the sense that there were things being acknowledged without being fully said. His words carried the weight of reflection rather than explanation, and hinted at tensions and concerns that had long remained private. What lingered most was not clarity, but a quiet sense of unease. In this account, we return to what Billy Crystal later shared in limited conversations with reporters, an encounter that stayed with him. It took place on Sunday afternoon, November 30, 2025, just 2 weeks before the tragedy. The visit followed a brief phone call from Rob himself. Billy drove to the Brentwood house he knew well, unaware that this meeting would come to define his final memories of his friend. Rob's voice on the phone had been steady and direct. He spoke only once, asking Billy to come over, not to talk about work. When Billy arrived and the door opened, the difference was immediate. Rob stood there, but something was altered. He appeared worn down, his usual composure softened by visible fatigue. His clothes were slightly rumpled, his movements less assured. When they shook hands, Billy noticed the grip lacked its familiar strength, as though strain had quietly accumulated over time. Inside, the house felt unusually still. The television remained off. No music filled the room. Rob poured a glass of water and set it down untouched. Throughout their time together, he did not drink. Billy noticed Rob's attention drifting repeatedly toward the hallway, as if his focus was divided. It was a small detail, but one that lingered in Billy's mind long after. They sat in silence before Rob spoke. When he did, his voice sounded lower, roughened by exhaustion. He told Billy that his family was in distress, that he had not spoken openly about it, and that he was tired in a way that went beyond the physical. He spoke about his son, Nick, and an incident earlier that month that had changed the atmosphere in the home. Rob described behavior that felt unfamiliar: outbursts, sudden anger, evenings charged with tension. At times, Michelle would step away to keep arguments from escalating. He also referenced a confrontation around Thanksgiving, a disagreement rooted in finances and the strain of responsibility. Rob did not repeat what was said, only that the exchange unsettled him deeply and left a lingering sense of unease. What troubled him most, he admitted, was the realization that he could no longer anticipate his son's reactions. At that point, Rob fell quiet. He pressed his hand to his forehead and stared down at the floor. Billy would later say that the image stayed with him, not an expression of anger, but of depletion. A man carrying the weight of responsibility, unsure of how much longer he could hold it together. It was not the expression of anger that stayed with Billy, but something quieter and more unsettling. It was the look of deep exhaustion, of someone worn down by worry, nearly emptied of certainty, yet still holding on. Rob spoke of his decision to keep Nick close, convinced that the steady presence of family might offer his son some sense of balance. He believed distance would only deepen the fracture. Then Rob said something Billy would later replay in his mind again and again. He admitted that he was afraid that if he pushed his son away, he might become the final person to cause irreparable harm. He spoke slowly, as though weighing each word before allowing it to surface. Billy noticed Rob's hands tightening together, a small, controlled movement that suggested how much he was restraining beneath the surface. It was at that moment that Billy responded more directly than he ever had before. He straightened, held Rob's gaze, and acknowledged the instinct to protect one's child. But he also spoke with urgency. He warned that Rob and Michelle were placing themselves in a situation that carried real risk. The behaviors being described, he said, could not continue unchecked, especially when they were unfolding within the walls of their own home. Faith in family, Billy reminded him, is natural. But silence, he cautioned, is not the same as protection. Some moments require boundaries, even when they are painful. Rob listened without interruption. Billy later recalled the moment Rob finally lifted his head. The fatigue in his eyes was unmistakable. When he spoke again, his voice softened. He said he understood the concern, but he could not bring himself to see his son as a threat. Nick, he said, had endured more than most, and Rob feared that one misstep, taken at the wrong moment, could undo what little stability remained. When he finished speaking, he leaned back and exhaled, as though unsure himself whether the path he was choosing was the right one. The conversation dissolved into silence. Rob stood, crossed the room, and paused at the window overlooking the backyard, a place tied to the calmest years of his family's life. After a moment, he turned back, rested a hand lightly on Billy's shoulder, and said he would take time to think. Billy left the Brentwood house as evening settled in. In the days that followed, he found himself unable to shake a feeling he could not clearly define. It was not fear, and not a sense of certainty, only a quiet impression that something was no longer holding together the way it once had. When news of the Brentwood incident later became public, that same feeling returned with greater clarity. Billy began to reconsider details he had once dismissed. At the time, nothing had appeared overt or alarming. Only in hindsight did he believe the signs had been there, subtle and easily overlooked. His first reaction to the news was disbelief, not because it was impossible, but because it stood in stark contrast to the man he thought he understood. What unfolded did not align with the image of Rob Reiner that Billy had carried for decades. Yet it was not the severity of the events that troubled him most, but the manner in which they had unfolded. The Brentwood home was not a secluded or isolated place. Rob and Michelle's lives followed predictable rhythms, punctuated by visitors, routines, and constant contact with the outside world. The detail that weighed heaviest on Billy was the absence of response. Someone had arrived, attempted to reach them, and yet received no answer for an extended period. It was an anomaly he could not explain. Billy listened closely to the accounts of family members as they described their first moments inside the house. Romy had seen her father first, reacting instinctively, while Michelle was discovered elsewhere. The sequence left Billy with questions he could not easily answer. He did not speculate, only noted that these details suggested events had not unfolded along a simple, linear pattern. In earlier conversations, Rob had told him that tension within the family rarely manifested directly, it spread slowly, subtly, from one space to another. In retrospect, Billy recognized a disturbing parallel between his own recollections of that afternoon and Rob's descriptions of the household's atmosphere in the months prior. Another factor that lingered in Billy's mind was the prolonged period before anyone outside the home realized something was amiss. For someone as attuned to family dynamics as Rob, this silence was incongruous. It echoed his earlier words, that at times, the house had grown uncomfortably quiet, as if all emotion had been pressed down, contained. Billy described the situation not in analytical or technical terms, but simply, a family enduring sustained emotional pressure. In this context, unresolved feelings can build slowly, until even small disturbances become unmanageable. Nick's history of difficulty with high-stress situations made this observation all the more acute. Rob had once told him that tensions could escalate faster than anyone could respond. Viewed alongside what later came to light, the similarity was striking, and profoundly unsettling. Even the physical state of the house seemed to carry its own weight. According to those familiar with the home, little had changed from daily routines. For Billy, who had spent many years there, this familiarity offered no comfort. Instead, it underscored how ordinary the surroundings remained even as extraordinary events had quietly taken shape. The reactions of those present left a deep impression as well. Billy recognized in them a disorientation and shock not unlike his own upon first learning the news. Yet perhaps the detail that struck him most was Nick's absence. He offered no judgment, only an acknowledgement. It recalled that afternoon in Brentwood when Rob had admitted he could no longer predict his son's responses under pressure. In Billy's eyes, the story did not reflect a single, sudden moment. Rather, it was the culmination of a long, unseen process. Small signals had always been present, quiet and easy to overlook, accumulating into a sequence that, in retrospect, could not be ignored. From that point, the story shifted in ways that could no longer be spoken openly, existing instead in the heavy, private thoughts of those closest to Rob Reiner. While the public struggled to assemble the fragmented accounts of what had occurred at Brentwood, Billy Crystal found himself in a markedly different state of mind. He did not first consider the nature of the events themselves. His attention was drawn instead to a detail that seemed small yet carried enormous weight, the fact that someone had left the house before anyone outside fully understood understood what was happening. Billy recalled the moment he realized that Nick Reiner was not there. A familiar heaviness settled in his chest. It was not surprise, but the return of an old premonition, a sense he had felt weeks earlier after leaving Rob's house following a long and private conversation. Nick had never been a stranger to him. Born in 1993, he had long been the focus of Rob's deepest anxieties. Over the years, Rob had confided repeatedly in Billy about Nick's struggles, the setbacks, the failed attempts to establish stability, and the cumulative effect on the family. Billy remembered Rob describing a time when Nick had almost completely disappeared from their lives, moving from place to place and severing contact for long stretches, leaving his parents in a state of constant worry. Given that history, Nick's absence when the Brentwood incident came to light immediately rekindled the concerns Rob had once voiced, the unpredictability of his son's responses when under pressure. Another detail weighed heavily on Billy. Through discreet channels in the entertainment community, he learned that the evening before the events became public, Rob and Nick had shared a tense exchange at a holiday gathering hosted by Conan O'Brien. Multiple attendees recalled Nick appearing restless, uncharacteristically unsettled. The accounts unervingly aligned with Rob's earlier descriptions of his son's increasingly volatile behavior. Billy also learned that Nick had left the Brentwood area that evening, several miles away from the home. To him, that distance was not merely geographic, it echoed a familiar pattern, consistent with Rob's accounts of Nick's tendency to withdraw from familiar surroundings during periods of emotional overload. As the story unfolded, Billy followed it with intense attention. When images surfaced showing Nick in court under the supervision of authorities, he said he was struck with a profound shock. In that moment, the anxieties and warnings he had once voiced to Rob crystallized. They were no longer abstract, but painfully real. From what he knew, Nick remained in custody as legal proceedings continued into early 2026. For Billy, this was more than a legal matter. It was a stark illustration that the events at Brentwood may not have been spontaneous or entirely unpredictable. They appeared, instead, as the culmination of a long, persistent struggle. Billy also recalled indirect remarks he had heard from an investigator within his professional network. The incident, according to that information, seemed rooted in complex family dynamics, and the sequence of events in the 24 hours preceding the discovery of the situation required careful consideration. Although not officially involved in any investigation, these observations left a lasting impression. To Billy, this was not a story of external interference, but of pressures that had quietly accumulated within the Reiner family over time. What weighed most heavily on him, however, was not the incident itself, but the bitter reality that Nick, the very son Rob had sought to protect, was at the center of it. In Billy's eyes, the film Being Charlie was never simply a creative endeavor. It was, to him, the clearest expression of Rob Reiner's last attempt to guide his son toward a measure of stability and peace. Rob had hoped the project might serve as a turning point, a path through which Nick could discover a different direction in life. Yet, over time, Billy came to understand that the deeper struggles remained unresolved, persistent beneath the surface. When he later saw Nick subjected to legal scrutiny, it felt, in that moment, as though the fragile hope Rob had held for so many years had collapsed entirely. In private conversations with close friends, Billy admitted that these anxieties had formed early on, not from a desire to anticipate disaster, but because the warning signs had quietly accumulated. Rob's confessions, the tension at the holiday gathering, Nick's unexplained absence, and finally his detention, all of it formed a chain of events that could no longer be ignored. As the situation moved from private concern into the realm of formal legal proceedings, Billy recognized that the story had entered a new phase. Loyalty, affection, or personal goodwill alone could no longer contain the truth. Its emergence was unavoidable. Those close to him observed a marked change. Billy began to withdraw from familiar routines. Restaurants he once frequented went unvisited. Planned year-end gatherings were declined. For days he remained mostly indoors, venturing out only briefly, driving through Brentwood without speaking to anyone. Those who saw him could sense a profound grief. For Billy, losing Rob was not merely the loss of a friend, it was the loss of a part of his inner world, a kind of spiritual anchor he had relied upon for decades. Rob had been the first person he called with good news, the one he turned to in moments of doubt or uncertainty. The most unbearable part was not the loss itself, but the timing. It had occurred while Billy was absent, unable to be there when Rob needed him most. Friends recall him replaying their final conversation endlessly, returning to the image of Rob's weary eyes and the quiet, unmistakable worry in his voice as he spoke of Nick. Billy admitted he had sensed that something was wrong, yet had believed Rob strong enough to navigate it alone. That belief, he would later say, became his heaviest burden. He wondered constantly whether he should have stayed longer, spoken more directly, or pressed harder to confront a danger that had been quietly growing beneath the surface. In the days that followed, Billy revisited old exchanges with Rob, the brief messages, the casual jokes, now laden with an unbearable weight. One friend recalled him murmuring repeatedly, "I thought I still had plenty of time. I was wrong." The words were not complaints, but a private confession, a recognition of limits and missed opportunities. Alongside sorrow, a quiet anger simmered, not aimed outward, but directed inward. Billy blamed himself for being a patient listener when firmness was needed. He blamed himself for believing that love alone could contain forces beyond his control. The anger did not erupt, it persisted, a low, smoldering presence. Friends recounted long, sleepless nights. Billy would rise before dawn, pacing silently through his home. Hours were spent at the window, staring outward in stillness, letting thoughts drift without distraction. The weight of his realization grew heavier with each passing day. The fears he had sensed, the warnings he had tried to voice, had materialized in the most painful way imaginable. Throughout it all, Billy felt both a witness and an outsider, helpless, watching events slip through his fingers. In a few private conversations with his closest friends, he admitted that this sense of helplessness was, in many ways, more unbearable than the loss itself. He had seen the signs, spoken candidly, and offered warnings with the sincerity he could muster. Yet all those efforts had proven insufficient. The realization pressed heavily upon him: there are situations in life where no matter the depth of love or care, people remain powerless. During that period, whispers circulated in the entertainment world suggesting that Billy had deliberately declined public appearances. Invitations from major programs continued to arrive in abundance, yet he refused them all. According to a close friend, he felt unprepared to speak Rob's name aloud without risking his composure. Each mention of it brought a flood of memories, accompanied by a renewed sense of guilt for not being present when circumstances had spiraled beyond control. In that silence, Billy reflected on nearly 50 years of friendship. Not to analyze missteps or assign blame, but to preserve the memories that had existed long before these events cast shadows over them. Safeguarding those memories became, for him, a way to keep Rob present in his life with integrity. When he chose to speak publicly, it was not directly or impulsively. Instead, Billy participated in a joint statement, co-signed by his wife Janice, Rob's closest friends, and longtime collaborators such as Albert Brooks, Martin Short, and Larry David. The statement did not dwell on the details of recent events, but honored a relationship that had endured for decades. It also acknowledged other figures closely tied to Rob's life and career: Mark Shaman, Barry Levinson, and many others who had worked with him over the years. The document was sent to the Associated Press as a quiet, heartfelt farewell to Rob and Michelle Reiner. For Billy, inclusion in the statement held profound significance. It was not only a public tribute, but also a means of expressing gratitude and acknowledging a friendship that had spanned nearly half a century. In the statement, friends recalled the qualities that had bound them from the start: a shared love of cinema, of storytelling, and of the darkened movie theaters where strangers could laugh, reflect, and sit together in silence before a story that moved them. That was the world Rob inhabited, and Billy had been there from the very beginning. Their friendship began in the mid-1970s on the set of All in the Family. At the time, Rob was already a known television star, while Billy was still finding his place. Despite their different paths, they recognized a shared outlook on life, one shaped by humor, thoughtfulness, and sincerity, rather than fame or power. Their conversations soon moved beyond the professional, forming the foundation of a bond that would endure. They became friends, then creative collaborators, and finally steadfast companions through the most pivotal stages of each other's careers. When Rob transitioned to directing, that relationship deepened further. Billy was not simply an actor in his films, he became a trusted collaborator, someone Rob invited to share ideas, refine dialogue, and shape critical emotional moments. When Harry Met Sally became perhaps the clearest evidence of that trust. The film, a cultural milestone in its own right, also reflected the rare understanding between two people who had spent decades cultivating both friendship and creative synergy. Billy once remarked that Rob was among the very few directors who allowed him complete freedom in performance, while still providing precise and thoughtful guidance. In a statement sent to the Associated Press, friends described Rob as a masterful storyteller, capable of moving effortlessly between comedy, drama, and documentary. These were not casual accolades, but reflections from people who had witnessed the depth of his craft. Rob respected actors, valued writers, and fostered a creative environment grounded in collaboration rather than command. For Billy, the most difficult part of preparing the statement was speaking of Rob in the past tense. Rob was not only a collaborator, but a central figure in his personal life. Billy had been a familiar presence at Rob and Michelle's Brentwood home, sharing meals, conversations about family, society, and the responsibilities of art. The knowledge that Rob and Michelle had passed together in that house made it feel as though a portion of Billy's most private memories had fractured. The joint statement, therefore, honored not only Rob as an artist, but Rob and Michelle as a couple. They were remembered for a partnership defined by loyalty, resilience, and a shared sense of purpose. Billy had long admired Michelle Singer Reiner's unwavering support, not a quiet presence behind Rob, but a steadfast companion who shaped both his private life and the values he pursued. Her absence, along with Rob's, left a profound void. To Billy, they had always existed as a whole, complementing one another through every stage of life. At the close of the statement, Billy and his friends cited a line from It's a Wonderful Life, a film Rob cherished. The line speaks to the reach one life can have, the countless lives touched, the emptiness left behind when that presence is gone. For Billy, the truth of that sentiment is immediate and personal. Rob's absence is felt not only in cinema, but in the quiet spaces of everyday life, in calls that will never be answered, in conversations that will never resume. After nearly 50 years of friendship, Billy's decision to speak publicly was not merely a response to grief. It was a deliberate act, a choice to preserve Rob's truth against the fleeting noise of headlines and speculation. He sought to ensure that Rob would be remembered not solely for his films, but for the loyalty, curiosity, and generosity that marked his life. The passing of Rob and Michelle Reiner was more than a shock to the entertainment world. It was the quiet, irrevocable closing of a chapter that had spanned nearly half a century. Behind the laughter, behind the celebrated work, there remained a profound sense of loss, unanswered questions, and a sadness that time alone cannot resolve. Billy's reflection is a reminder that the signs of struggle often appear long before the outcome is known, and that even recognition may not suffice to change the course of events.